one of the burning issues in this part of the country, and indeed all over the country in recent times, more and more awareness regarding the fluoridation of the water in this country. And we have put out appeals for people to come on the air to argue for and against over the last couple of months. I have an environmental scientist on the phone this morning. It's Declan Waugh, and Declan is from County Cork. Declan, a very good morning to you.
Hi Michael, how are you?
Fine, thanks. Thanks for taking the call this morning, Declan.
No bother.
Now you are spending a lot of your time studying the effects of fluoride on people in this country, and could you just tell me first and foremost, and remind the listeners, what exactly is fluoride and why is it being put into our water systems?
Well, it's not necessarily fluoride that's being put into our water systems. It's a chemical, an industrial chemical, synthetic chemical called hexafluoroacetic acid that's being put into our water supply. And from this, they're creating fluoride ions, which and other compounds which are present in drinking water. And the original reason it was put in was to treat a dental decay, which is a disease, dental caries. So it was for medical purposes.
So back in the 60s, doing some research, and in 1964 is when it started to be added to our water supply here in this country, and that's over almost 50 years ago, and it's still there. And would I be right in saying that we're the only country in Europe that has mandatory fluoridation of the water?
Well, we were actually the first country in the world to introduce a legislative policy mandating that all local authorities throughout the country fluoridate their drinking water supply. And there's only one other country in the world that has a similar policy, and that is Singapore. Every other country in Europe has stopped. The few countries that did pursue it, like Finland, they stopped in 1991. The Netherlands stopped in the 1970s. It actually resulted in the Minister for Health resigning in disgrace in the Netherlands because they introduced the legislation to prevent it from ever happening again. Sweden stopped in the 1970s. East Germany stopped on unification in 1990. And all of the Eastern Bloc countries stopped when they got their independence from Russia in 1990 as well.
So basically what you're saying here this morning, Declan, is any country who had the wherewithal to stop, had the resources to stop doing this, they did so. You mentioned all those countries in Europe. Why did they stop?
They would have undertaken an independent risk assessment by their various agencies. So like countries like Denmark and the Netherlands, and in Sweden they went to the Nobel Institute, which is, you know, an acclaimed scientific institute, and asked them to examine the evidence, and the Nobel Institute told them not to pursue it on health grounds. The French went to the Pasteur Institute, again a very learned institute, and they likewise told the French that it was unsafe. The Japanese introduced it in the 1950s under American policy when they were occupied by the Americans, and they stopped in the 1970s because they found that it was actually resulting in a worsening of the dental health within their population. And the same happened in Chile. They introduced it in 1985 under Ronald Reagan's kind of foreign policy, and they stopped in 1995 because there was a significant decline in the dental health of the population, where overexposure to fluoride was damaging their teeth.
So it's not having the effect that supposedly it was supposed to have in the first place, that it was supposed to increase the dental health of the nation?
No, I mean, there's no scientific evidence, credible scientific evidence at all that it actually does that. The Chief Medical Officer in the United Kingdom in 2000 published a report which is called the NHS York Review, which examined thousands of medical and scientific papers published worldwide, and they couldn't find one scientific paper to show that water fluoridation was either safe or effective.
And incredibly, I suppose, and I'm as guilty as the next person, Declan, I was completely oblivious and ignorant of the fact that I would have known down to the years that the government was putting fluoride into the water, but thinking, oh, this has to be a good product, it has to be good for our teeth. But early this year, I sort of had an awakening, if you call it that I realised, I did a bit of research, how damaging fluoride was to the nation's health. And we seem to be just rolling along with the punches, as it were, do nothing about it. I know you're spearheading an information campaign, but how do you get the message out to people that we have fluoride in our water and it can be potentially damaging?
Good question, Michael. I mean, it's quite ridiculous. I mean, you have a scenario in Ireland, like I studied environmental science in college, and fluoride was not taught to any of the either undergrads or postgrads in terms of its environmental or human health impact. Likewise, it's not taught in universities in Ireland in the area of medicine, in the area of toxicology, in the area of biological sciences. In Ireland, for some reason, it's just not a subject that people are aware of. And
that obviously sounds like a very deliberate policy.
I have no idea why that is the case, because internationally fluoride has been one of the largest, one of the most common sources of both industrial, agricultural and human health pollution that has resulted in dozens of major legal cases taken against industry for poisoning, and some of the largest lawsuits that have ever been paid out in history in the United States and elsewhere have been due to fluoride. So when I was approached about it over a year ago, my immediate reaction was that there could be nothing wrong with fluoride because we've been adding it for 50 years nearly to our water supply, and surely those in responsible positions have ensured that the chemical we're adding is safe. And when I went to research it, I was absolutely blown away by what I found. And I mean, I didn't look at hocus pocus websites. I went to the most important reputable organizations such as the United States National Academy of Sciences and the European Commission's own website. And the National Academy of Sciences in the United States, which is the elite scientific body in America, published a report in 2006 on fluoride. And I was really shocked with what they found, because first and foremost, they said that the toxicological profile of the chemical that we're adding is unknown. Secondly, all 10 members of the National Academy unanimously found that fluoride in drinking water can cause cancer and can promote cancer, as well as finding that it negatively impacts on the endocrine system where it affects the thyroid gland. They also listed over 50 detailed scientific, medical and toxicological studies that they believed were necessary and needed to be undertaken urgently to demonstrate that it was safe for all sectors of society. So like for people who are diabetic, for instance, or for children, or for people who have problems with their thyroid gland or other medical issues, they would be highly sensitive to the issue of fluoride. None of those studies have been done. And when the EU published their report in 2010, they also said that the toxicological profile of the chemical was unknown. And for me as an environmental scientist, you do not put a chemical into the drinking water supply that's going to be consumed by the majority of the population of the country where the toxicological profile of the chemical is unknown. That is criminally negligent as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely, yeah. And I get the feeling, Declan, at some point the government's going to have to do a U-turn on this and reverse the legislation and own up to the fact that fluoride, and let's call it what it is, it's a poison. It is a poison, and according to my research, it's a byproduct of the chemical waste industry, and it's been dumped in Ireland by other countries who won't fluoridate their water, but yet they'll sell it to us, and we put into our water. Now, I contacted our TDs here in this particular county. We're in County Louth. I contacted the Fine Gael TDs, Fergus O'Dowd and Peter Fitzpatrick, and the Labour TD, Jed Nash, asked them what they intend to do with fluoride, and I got back just a very blasé statement saying it's government policy that fluoride is good for the people and they will continue to do so indefinitely. And that was it, end of.
Yeah, it's a sad joke. I mean, I'm corresponding with the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Environment, the Inland Fisheries, because fluoride is also toxic to fish at very low levels, and the Department of Health, and it's like a merry-go-round. So the EPA have told me repeatedly that their only policy is to enforce the drinking water legislation in Ireland for mandatory fluoridation. Their policy is not to examine the health or environmental impacts of fluoridation, which I find astonishing.
It is astonishing, but can I ask another question, Declan? We would consider ourselves to be a smart, intelligent race of people. The Irish have always sort of claimed that, and yet here we are out on our own in Europe, in a sense, as an island, but also when it comes to fluoridation, the rest of Europe seems to have cottoned on the fact that fluoride is bad, it has negative effects on health, and yet here we are, just happy-go-lucky, willy-nilly, still pumping away Ghetto.
Yeah, it's disgraceful, but it's the same people who are pushing the policy for the last 40 years. They're fluoride promoters. That's basically what they do. So they're protecting their own stance on the issue and their reputations rather than protecting the public.
Is there a big vested interest here? Pharmaceutical companies, if you lift the lid on all of this, is there a big vested interest somewhere that's constantly sort of maybe haranguing the government to keep the fluoride in the water?
It would probably be the sugar companies, industry that like soft drinks and stuff like that basically we spend in the region of 400 million on soft drinks a year in Ireland, so that industry will want any policy that will allow them to continue to sell their soft drinks to children, where a policy that they believe may prevent dental decay because of the consumption of soft drinks will ensure the continued sale of their product.
Will there be a case someday, Declan, and hopefully it comes very soon, when the government will put its hand up and say we were wrong about fluoride and the fluoridation of the water for the last 50 years, and could ever be a case where there could be a can of worms opened up where there'll be huge sort of compensation to be paid out for people who have been proven to be made ill from ingesting fluoride over a period of time? I'm thinking back to the army deafness cases where there was a slew of, once one opened the door. Is it a case that the government maybe are looking over their shoulder at this point in time?
They're continuing to ignore. The government have never accepted responsibilities for decisions where they've been proven wrong. It's never happened. Now, like, you live in Dundalk, right, and the latest information that I find most alarming, like, is related to diabetes, for instance, right? The Russian Academy of Sciences published a report recently where they identified that fluoride inhibits insulin synthesis in the body and can impact on diabetics. The incidence of diabetes in Northern Ireland is just about 4% of the population. 75,000 people in Northern Ireland have diabetes. You cross the border into the Republic of Ireland and there are 400,000 people in Ireland who are diabetic.
And that's just not coincidence because we're in a different country. We're on the same island.
We're on the same island and we're more than twice the incidence of diabetes. Now, diabetes costs the health service in Ireland 10% of their entire budget. Over 1.4 billion is spent a year treating diabetics in Ireland.
What I can't understand, Declan, is if there was the slightest doubt about fluoride, and if you do some honest research, and you will find out so many side effects to fluoride, as opposed to what the supposed advantage of having fluoride in the water is. If there was a single doubt about it, it should have been pulled years ago. And yet there are so many horror stories coming from the fluoride, the side effects in health. I can't understand how any sane person could allow this to continue.
I agree. I mean, back in the 1960s, one of the longest studies that was done on fluoride was over 14 years, and they identified that there was a sector of the population that were intolerant to fluoride, and that when they consumed it, that it resulted in neurological disorders, in gastrointestinal disorders, and in dermatological disorders in the population. Now, we have the highest incidence of neurological disorders in the world, and 30% of GP visits in Ireland are to do with skin disorders. And it's really just mind-blowing. And that was a 14-year study that was published in a medical journal. Another more recent one done in Finland in 1990, which was extremely interesting because they did it in a city where they discontinued water fluoridation, but they didn't tell the population that they were going to turn the fluoride off. And they sent out a questionnaire to 1,000 people documenting the 25 most common medical ailments in the community, and then repeated it 3 months after they stopped fluoridating. In 3 months, there was a 13% reduction in general medical ailments within the population, and that is in a published peer-reviewed medical journal.
Goodness me.
I have no doubt that water fluoridation is the single largest contributor to the disease burden we have in Ireland today.
Incredible statistics, and I'm sure if people want to check more about it, and no doubt people listening this morning will be saying, fluoride, well, I didn't realise how damaging it is, why it's in the water, does it need to be in the water? As I said, there's a lot of ignorance about fluoride out there. I, for one, 12 months ago would have been totally oblivious to it, happy-go-lucky,